What's the
Send
problem?
the police! Send the police!
What's the problem there?
The chimp killed my friend!
On a cold February afternoon in 2009, a 911 call would be made that would shock the nation and forever change how America viewed exotic pets. The voice on the other end was filled with terror, desperation, and disbelief, as a woman screamed words that still haunt emergency dispatchers today. "He's killing my friend! My chimpanzee is killing my friend!" This is the true story of Travis, a 200-pound chimpanzee who lived as a beloved family member for nearly 15 years before turning into a nightmare that would leave one woman fighting for her life and an entire country questioning the boundaries between human and animal, love and obsession. The story begins not with violence, but with love. In 1995, Sandra Herold and her husband Jerome were living a comfortable life in Stamford, Connecticut. They were successful business owners, operating a towing company that had provided them with a nice home and financial security. But their lives felt incomplete. They had lost their only daughter, Susan, years earlier, and the grief had left a hole that seemed impossible to fill. That's when they met Travis. Travis wasn't born in the wild jungles of Africa or raised in a sanctuary. He was born in captivity, taken from his mother when he was just 3 days old, a practice that animal behaviorists now recognize as deeply traumatic for both mother and infant. But in 1995, the Herald saw only a tiny, helpless baby who needed love and care. They brought Travis home, and from that moment, he wasn't treated as a pet or even as an exotic animal. He was their child, their replacement for the daughter they had lost. Sandra would later tell reporters that Travis filled the empty space in their hearts, giving them purpose and joy in a way that nothing else could. The early years seemed magical. Travis was curious, intelligent, and surprisingly adaptable to human life. He learned to use the toilet, to dress himself in clothing that Sandra carefully selected for him. He would sit at the dinner table, using utensils to eat his meals. He learned to operate the television remote, to log onto the computer, and even to pour himself drinks from the refrigerator. To visitors, Travis appeared to be living a charmed life. He had his own room, complete with a bed, toys, and even a television. He wore designer clothes and jewelry. Sandra would take him for rides in the car, where he would sit in the passenger seat like any other family member. He became locally famous, appearing in commercials for Coca-Cola and Old Navy, and even making appearances on television shows like The Maury Povich Show. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, Travis lived what many would consider a privileged life. He was featured in local newspapers, appeared at charity events, and became something of a celebrity in Stamford. Children would recognize him around town, and Sandra basked in the attention that her unusual son brought her. Travis seemed to thrive in this environment. He was social, engaging, and appeared to genuinely enjoy human company. He had learned dozens of commands and could communicate through a combination of sign language and vocalizations that Sandra had learned to interpret. He would help with simple household tasks, seemed to understand television programs, and even showed what appeared to be emotional responses to music and movies. But beneath this veneer of domesticity, subtle warning signs were beginning to emerge that most people either missed or chose to ignore. Animal behaviorists who later studied the case noted that Travis's behavior, while charming to humans, was actually highly abnormal for a chimpanzee. He had been deprived of normal social interaction with his own species, never learning the complex social structures and communication methods that are essential to chimpanzee development. Instead, he had been forced to adapt to a human world that, no matter how loving, could never truly meet his psychological and social needs. By 2003, Travis was 8 years old and weighed nearly 180 pounds. This was when the first serious incident occurred, though it would be largely overlooked and downplayed by those who loved him. In 2003, Travis attacked a woman who was visiting the Herald home. The details of this incident were never fully publicized, but police records show that the attack was serious enough to require medical attention for the victim. However, no charges were filed, and Travis was allowed to remain in the home. This incident should have been a wake-up call. A 180-pound chimpanzee attacking a human being is not a minor behavioral issue. It's a dangerous situation that could have easily resulted in death. Chimpanzees are extraordinarily strong, with muscle density approximately 1.35 times greater than humans. What might seem like playful behavior from a chimpanzee can cause serious injury to a human. But Sandra Herold was not ready to accept that her beloved Travis might be dangerous. In interviews given years later, she would describe the 2003 incident as an aberration, something that happened because the victim had done something to upset Travis. She maintained that Travis was normally gentle and loving, that the attack was completely out of character. This denial would prove to be a fatal mistake. In the years following the 2003 incident, those closest to Travis began to notice changes in his behavior. He was becoming more territorial, more possessive of Sandra, and more aggressive towards strangers. He had episodes of what can only be described as destructive rage, during which he would tear apart furniture, break windows, and seem almost impossible to control. Sandra's solution to these behavioral problems was to medicate Travis with human psychiatric drugs, including Xanax, which she would give him in his tea. She obtained these medications through various means, sometimes from her own prescriptions and sometimes through less legitimate channels. She believed that if she could just keep Travis calm, if she could just manage his moods, everything would be fine. February 16th, 2009, started like any other day in the Herold household. Sandra, now 70 years old and recently widowed after Jerome's death in 2004, went through her usual routine with Travis. She had been relying on him even more heavily for emotional support since her husband's passing, and their relationship had become increasingly codependent. That morning, Travis had been unusually agitated. He was pacing, vocalizing more than normal, and seemed unable to settle down. Sandra, following her usual protocol, gave him Xanax in his tea, hoping it would calm him down. She had no way of knowing that this decision would contribute to the horror that was about to unfold. Around noon, Travis managed to get outside. This wasn't entirely unusual. He had gotten out before and had always been coaxed back inside. Sandra called her friend Charla Nash, asking for help in getting Travis back into the house. Charla Nash was 55 years old, a longtime friend of Sandra's who had known Travis for years. She had helped with Travis before and had no reason to think this time would be any different. She had fed him, played with him, and interacted with him countless times without incident. Travis knew her, trusted her, and had never shown any aggression toward her. When Charla arrived at the Herold home that afternoon, she was driving her usual car and wearing clothes that Travis had seen her in before. There was nothing unusual about her appearance or behavior. She got out of her car and approached Travis, who was standing in the driveway, just as she had done dozens of times before. What happened next defied all logical explanation and challenged everything that Sandra thought she knew about the animal she had raised as her son. Without warning, without any provocation that anyone could identify, Travis launched himself at Charla Nash. The attack was swift, brutal, and unlike anything that even experienced animal control officers had ever witnessed. Travis immediately went for Charla's face and hands, using his powerful jaws and sharp teeth to inflict devastating injuries. Within moments, he had torn off her nose, lips, and eyelids. He severed both of her hands at the wrists. The attack was so vicious and so focused that it seemed almost calculated, as if Travis knew exactly how to cause maximum damage. Sandra Herold, watching in horror from inside the house, immediately called 911. The call she made would become one of the most disturbing emergency calls ever recorded, played and replayed in news broadcasts around the world. Her voice, filled with terror and disbelief, conveyed the unthinkable reality of what was happening in her driveway. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher asked. Please hurry. He's killing my friend, Sandra screamed. Who's killing your friend? My chimpanzee. He ripped her apart. You've got to shoot him. The dispatcher, trained to handle all manner of emergencies, was clearly struggling to understand what he was hearing. Chimpanzee attacks on humans were so rare that most emergency services had no protocols for dealing with them. "Did you say a chimpanzee?" the dispatcher asked. "Yes. He's eating her. Please hurry." Sandra's description of Travis eating Charla was not hyperbole. Chimpanzees, when they attack, often bite and tear at their victims in ways that can appear cannibalistic. Travis was not just attacking Charla, he was systematically destroying her body, focusing on her face and hands with a fury that seemed almost supernatural. While still on the phone with 911, Sandra grabbed a butcher knife and ran outside to try to save her friend. She stabbed Travis repeatedly, screaming at him to stop, to get away from Charla. But Travis, who had always been gentle and obedient with Sandra, seemed not to even notice her presence. He continued his assault on Charla, who was now lying motionless on the ground. The 911 call continued for several minutes, with Sandra providing a running commentary of horror that was almost impossible to believe. She described Travis ripping Charla's face off, tearing her hands away, and continuing to maul her even after she had stopped moving. "He's ripping her apart," Sandra screamed. "I need someone here with a gun. He's going to kill her." The first police officers to arrive at the scene were not prepared for what they encountered. Most law enforcement officers never expect to face a 200-pound chimpanzee in the course of their duties, and the scene that greeted them was like something out of a horror movie. Travis was still attacking Charla when the police arrived, though she was no longer conscious or responsive. The driveway was covered in blood, and the extent of her injuries was immediately apparent to anyone who saw her. Several officers later said that they initially couldn't tell whether the victim was male or female because of the extent of the facial injuries. When Travis saw the police officers, he initially backed away from Charla, but he showed no fear or inclination to flee. Instead, he seemed curious about these new arrivals, approaching them with the same casual confidence he had always shown around humans. Officer Frank Chiafari was the first to exit his patrol car. Travis immediately approached him, and for a moment, it seemed as though the situation might be resolved peacefully. But then Travis did something that chilled the officers to the bone. He opened the door of the police cruiser and attempted to get inside. This single action, more than anything else, demonstrated the true danger of the situation. Travis was not behaving like a wild animal that had been cornered or threatened. He was behaving like a domesticated creature who was simply following his own incomprehensible logic. The fact that he knew how to open a car door, that he was comfortable approaching armed police officers, made him infinitely more dangerous than any wild animal would have been. Officer Chiafari made a split-second decision that probably saved his life and the lives of his fellow officers. He drew his service weapon and fired multiple shots at Travis. The 200-pound chimpanzee was struck several times, but incredibly, he did not immediately fall or retreat. Instead, he looked at the officers with what witnesses described as an almost human expression of surprise and hurt. Travis then turned and walked back toward the house, leaving a trail of blood behind him. He entered through the same door he had used thousands of times before, went to his favorite spot in the living room, and collapsed. He died within minutes, surrounded by the toys and comforts that had defined his life with the Heralds. Charla Nash was rushed to Stamford Hospital in critical condition. The medical team that received her was faced with injuries that challenged the limits of modern medicine. She had lost both hands, her nose, lips, eyelids, and most of her facial structure. The damage was so extensive that plastic surgeons initially doubted whether reconstruction would even be possible. Over the following hours, a team of surgeons worked to stabilize Charla's condition and address the most life-threatening injuries. The surgery lasted more than 7 hours, and it was only the first of many procedures that would follow. Despite their best efforts, doctors were forced to acknowledge that some of Charla's injuries were simply too severe to repair completely. Charla had lost her sight permanently. The damage to her hands was so extensive that reattachment was not possible. Her sense of smell and taste were gone forever. The psychological trauma of the attack, combined with the physical reality of her new limitations, created challenges that would take years to address. But Charla Nash was alive, and as the days passed, it became clear that she possessed a strength of spirit that would prove to be as remarkable as the attack itself had been horrific. In the days following the attack, investigators struggled to understand what had gone wrong. Travis had lived peacefully with humans for nearly 15 years. He had been socialized, trained, and loved. What could have triggered such a sudden and violent change in behavior? Several theories emerged, though none could fully explain the catastrophic nature of the attack. The Xanax that Sandra had given Travis that morning was one obvious factor. Xanax, while effective for treating anxiety in humans, can have unpredictable effects on animals, particularly primates. Some experts suggested that the drug might have caused Travis to become confused, aggressive, or unable to recognize familiar people. Another theory focused on Travis's possible infection with Lyme disease. Blood tests conducted after his death revealed antibodies suggesting that he had been exposed to the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. In both humans and animals, Lyme disease can cause neurological symptoms, including aggression and behavioral changes. But perhaps the most significant factor was simply Travis's nature as a chimpanzee. Despite 15 years of domestication, Travis was still a wild animal with instincts and behaviors that humans could never fully understand or control. Chimpanzees in the wild are known to be capable of extreme violence, particularly when defending territory or establishing dominance. It's possible that something in Charla's appearance or behavior that day triggered these deep-seated instincts. Some animal behaviorists suggested that Travis might have been protecting Sandra from what he perceived as a threat. Chimpanzees are highly territorial and can become extremely aggressive when they believe their group is under attack. It's possible that Travis, in his confused and medicated state, saw Charla as a danger to Sandra rather than as a friend. In the months following the attack, questions of legal responsibility began to emerge. Who, if anyone, should be held accountable for what had happened to Charla Nash? Sandra Herold maintained that she had no way of knowing that Travis would ever be dangerous. She pointed to his 15 years of peaceful behavior, his gentleness with children, and his status as a beloved member of the community. She insisted that the attack was completely unpredictable and that she was as much a victim as Charla was. However, critics argued that the 2003 attack should have served as a warning that Travis was potentially dangerous. They also questioned Sandra's decision to medicate Travis with human psychiatric drugs and her general approach to keeping a wild animal as a pet. Charla Nash and her legal team filed a lawsuit against Sandra Herold's estate, seeking $50 million in damages. The lawsuit argued that Sandra had been negligent in her care of Travis and that she should have known that keeping a chimpanzee as a pet posed an unreasonable risk to others. The case was complicated by the fact that Connecticut law at the time did not explicitly prohibit the ownership of chimpanzees as pets. While some municipalities had restrictions on exotic animals, there was no clear legal framework for determining responsibility in cases like this. In 2012, Charla also attempted to sue the state of Connecticut, arguing that officials had failed to adequately regulate exotic pet ownership and that their negligence had contributed to her injuries. However, this lawsuit was ultimately unsuccessful, as the court ruled that the state could not be held liable for injuries caused by privately owned animals. Sandra Herold never fully recovered from the events of February 16, 2009. The woman who had once proudly shown off her beloved Travis to television cameras and newspaper reporters became a recluse, rarely leaving her home and avoiding all contact with the media. Friends and neighbors reported that Sandra was consumed by guilt and grief. She had lost not only Travis, whom she had genuinely loved as a son, but also her friendship with Charla Nash. The knowledge that her decision to keep Travis as a pet had resulted in such devastating consequences weighed heavily on her. In 2010, just over a year after the attack, Sandra Herold died of a ruptured aortic aneurysm. She was 72 years old. While the official cause of death was medical, many who knew her believed that she had died of a broken heart, unable to live with the guilt and loss that had defined her final year. Sandra's death meant that Charla's lawsuit would be settled against her estate rather than against Sandra, personally. While this provided some financial compensation for Charla's medical expenses and ongoing care, it also meant that questions about Sandra's motivations and state of mind would never be fully answered. Despite the devastating nature of her injuries, Charla Nash demonstrated a resilience and courage that inspired people around the world. Her recovery was long and difficult, involving dozens of surgeries and months of rehabilitation. She had to learn to navigate the world without sight, without hands, and with a dramatically altered appearance. In 2011, Charla made her first major public appearance on The Oprah Winfrey Show. The interview was emotionally powerful as Charla spoke about her experience with grace and dignity, never expressing bitterness towards Sandra or Travis. She had undergone a face transplant, one of the few people in the world to receive such a procedure, and while the results were not perfect, they had restored some functionality and appearance to her devastated features. Charla's appearance on Oprah was not just about telling her story, it was about advocating for change. She spoke passionately about the need for stricter laws governing exotic pet ownership, arguing that no one else should have to experience what she had gone through. "I don't want this to happen to anybody else," she said during the interview. "These animals are wild animals, and they should be in the wild or in sanctuaries where they can be properly cared for by people who understand them." Charla's advocacy work helped to raise awareness about the dangers of keeping exotic animals as pets. Her story became a rallying point for animal rights activists and legislators who were working to strengthen laws governing exotic pet ownership. The Travis case had a significant impact on legislation regarding exotic pet ownership. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, several states moved to strengthen their laws prohibiting the ownership of dangerous exotic animals. In 2010, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the Captive Primate Safety Act, which would have prohibited the interstate transport of primates for the pet trade. The bill was directly inspired by the Travis case and would have significantly reduced the availability of primates as pets. However, the bill stalled in the Senate and was never enacted into law. Despite this setback at the federal level, many states took action on their own. Connecticut strengthened its exotic animal laws, making it much more difficult for individuals to obtain permits to keep dangerous animals as pets. Other states followed suit, creating a patchwork of regulations that made exotic pet ownership more challenging and expensive. The Travis case also led to increased scrutiny of facilities that breed and sell exotic animals. Animal welfare organizations used Charla's story to highlight the broader problems with the exotic pet trade, including the poor conditions in which many animals are kept and the lack of proper veterinary care. Beyond its legislative impact, the Travis case fundamentally changed how many Americans viewed the relationship between humans and wild animals. The story challenged the popular notion that love and proper care could overcome the basic nature of wild animals. For decades, stories about people who kept exotic pets had been largely positive. Movies, television shows, and news features had celebrated individuals who formed bonds with tigers, bears, primates, and other wild animals. The Travis case served as a stark reminder that these relationships, no matter how loving they might appear, carried inherent and potentially deadly risks. Animal behaviorists used the case to educate the public about the complex needs of wild animals and the impossibility of truly domesticating species that had evolved in completely different environments. They explained that behaviors that might seem cute or endearing in a young animal could become dangerous or destructive as the animal matured. The case also sparked discussions about the ethics of keeping wild animals in captivity, even in zoos and sanctuaries. While most experts agreed that reputable facilities provided better care than private individuals could, the Travis case raised questions about whether any form of captivity was appropriate for highly intelligent species like chimpanzees. One of the most troubling aspects of the Travis case was the depth of Sandra Herold's attachment to him. Her decision to keep him as a pet was not based on a casual desire for an unusual companion. It was rooted in profound grief and loss that had never been properly addressed. Psychologists who studied the case noted that Sandra's relationship with Travis exhibited many of the characteristics of unhealthy human relationships. She was isolated, dependent on Travis for emotional support, and unable to set appropriate boundaries. Her love for Travis, while genuine, had become obsessive and ultimately destructive. This psychological dimension of the case highlighted the importance of proper grief counseling and mental health support for people who have experienced significant losses. Sandra's decision to replace her deceased daughter with a chimpanzee was, in many ways, a symptom of unresolved trauma that had never been properly treated. The case also demonstrated how easily people can deceive themselves about the nature of their relationships with animals. Sandra genuinely believed that Travis loved her in the same way that a human child would love a parent. This belief, while emotionally satisfying, was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of animal psychology and behavior. The Travis case provided scientists with valuable, if tragic, data about chimpanzee behavior and the effects of domestication on wild animals. Researchers who studied the case noted several important factors that contributed to the attack. First, Travis's separation from his mother at 3 days old had deprived him of essential early socialization with other chimpanzees. This early trauma had lasting effects on his psychological development, making him more dependent on humans, but also more unpredictable in his behavior. Second, Travis's isolation from other chimpanzees throughout his life meant that he never learned normal social behaviors for his species. Chimpanzees are highly social animals with complex hierarchies and communication systems. Travis had been forced to adapt to human social structures, which were fundamentally different from those of his own species. Third, the use of human psychiatric medications on Travis had potentially dangerous and unpredictable effects. Chimpanzees metabolize drugs differently than humans do, and medications that are safe for people can have toxic effects on other species. Finally, the case demonstrated that even 15 years of apparently peaceful coexistence could not overcome the basic instincts and behaviors that had evolved over millions of years. Travis's attack on Charla was not the result of abuse or mistreatment. It was the expression of natural behaviors that had been suppressed but never eliminated. The Travis case received unprecedented media coverage, with news outlets around the world reporting on the attack and its aftermath. The 911 call made by Sandra Herold was played repeatedly on television and radio, shocking listeners with its raw depiction of terror and violence. The media coverage was both a blessing and a curse for those involved in the case. On one hand, it brought attention to the important issues of exotic pet ownership and animal welfare. On the other hand, it turned a private tragedy into a public spectacle, with reporters and camera crews camping outside the homes of everyone connected to the story. Charla Nash, in particular, had to navigate the difficult balance between using media attention to advocate for change while also protecting her privacy and dignity. Her decision to appear on the Oprah Winfrey Show was carefully calculated to maximize the impact of her message while maintaining control over how her story was told. The case also highlighted the media's fascination with unusual and violent stories. The combination of a beloved pet turning deadly, severe human injuries, and the involvement of a non-human perpetrator created a perfect storm of elements that captured public attention in ways that more typical stories could not. More than a decade after the attack, the Travis case continues to influence discussions about exotic pet ownership, animal welfare, and the relationship between humans and wild animals. Charla Nash remains an advocate for stronger laws and better education about the risks of keeping exotic pets. The case has become a standard reference point in animal behavior courses, veterinary schools, and law enforcement training programs. It serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of understanding and respecting the natural behaviors of wild animals, regardless of how domesticated they might appear. For the families and communities affected by the case, the legacy is more personal. The attack changed how they view the relationship between humans and animals, creating a lasting awareness of the potential dangers that even beloved pets can pose. The case also serves as a reminder of the importance of making difficult decisions based on facts rather than emotions. Sandra Herold's love for Travis was genuine and deep, but it blinded her to the warning signs that might have prevented the tragedy. Her story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of allowing emotional attachment to override rational judgment. The Travis chimpanzee attack stands as one of the most disturbing and significant animal attack cases in American history. It was a tragedy that could have been prevented, a devastating reminder of what happens when humans attempt to impose their will on the natural world without understanding the consequences. Sandra Herold's love for Travis was real, but it was also selfish. She kept him not because it was best for him, but because it filled a need in her own life. She ignored warning signs, dismissed expert advice, and ultimately created a situation that destroyed the lives of everyone involved, including Travis himself. Charla Nash's courage in the aftermath of the attack has been inspiring, but it should not obscure the fact that her suffering was entirely preventable. A different decision 15 years earlier, a decision to place Travis in a sanctuary where he could live with his own species, would have saved her from a lifetime of disability and trauma. The case serves as a powerful reminder that wild animals, no matter how they are raised or how much they are loved, remain wild. They are not children, they are not family members, and they cannot be truly domesticated. They are magnificent creatures that deserve to live according to their own nature, not according to human fantasies about what that nature should be. In the end, the Travis case is a story about the price of playing God, about what happens when love becomes obsession, and about the tragic consequences of refusing to accept the fundamental truth that some boundaries should never be crossed. It is a story that should serve as a permanent warning to anyone who believes that enough love can overcome the basic realities of biology and evolution. The lesson of Travis is clear. When we dress nature in human clothing and call it love, we create not harmony, but tragedy. And the price of that tragedy is paid not just by the animals we claim to love, but by the innocent human beings who become victims of our refusal to accept the world as it truly is.